Hello and welcome to another episode of The Voice for American Law Enforcement with your host, Randy Sutton. I am a 34-year police veteran. I am the author of several books, including A Cop's Life and the upcoming Rescuing 911, The Fight for America's Safety, a very timely book, especially now. And then also the founder of The Wounded Blue, the National Assistance and Support Organization for Injured and Disabled Law Enforcement Officers. I love to talk about law enforcement, and that's all we do on the show. And I love to have a great guest with me, and I will not disappoint the listeners and the viewers today because I have with me the unconquerable Dave Smith. And Dave Smith is, I could read his pedigree, but let's just say that he's been involved in the law enforcement world for decades and was a lieutenant with the Arizona Highway Patrol and has trained probably, what would you say, Dave, 40,000 cops in your history? More?
Oh man, you just in seminars, you think about my years with the Law Enforcement Television Network, we had 250,000 cops signed up. So that's a lot of people there.
That's a lot of people. Dave is literally one of the most sought after criminal justice experts in the country, and his viewpoints on the topics of law enforcement are entertaining as well as informative. So, Dave, thanks for joining me here on The Voice for American Law Enforcement.
It's always great to be with you, Randy, and always talking about topics that are critical to law enforcement.
So let's jump right in. There have been things taking place in our nation that are stunning of late. And last night, while I was getting ready to go on Fox News, I received a message saying, "Hey, be prepared to be canceled because the FBI are now raiding the home of the former President Donald Trump." So I actually expected that would take place. They actually put me on, but I've been watching the coverage of this search warrant being served on the former president of the United States, and I'm not only am I stunned, but I'm really, really concerned. Dave, you and I spent literally decades working in law enforcement. We know what power is, and I, for one, am very, very cautious when it comes to granting more power, especially in a law enforcement setting. While we love to have more tools at our disposal and we like to have that power, it can be abused. And I've got to say, I am really concerned that this search warrant is going to turn out to be something that we will find to be an abuse of power. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh man, I got to tell you what, that has still gotten me stymied because this seems like a bridge too far, and that's my question is, what are they? Is there so much animus toward Trump that we've got to literally suspend those things we know are essential to a constitutional republic? Think about it, Randy. When we were doing search warrants, we still supposedly today have to specifically articulate our probable cause. We have to articulate those items to be seized, and then we have to leave a very clear list to the person who is the subject of that warrant. And then for the citizens who aren't law enforcement listening to this, there's a liability for you when you sign that as when you are signing the warrant to the judge. You're swearing. I mean, it's an oath that you are telling the truth. Now, if it's true that they were taking wholesale boxes, that must have been the most generally written search warrant I've ever heard of. And the problem I have is what exactly, because this constant cascade of investigations, whether you like Trump or not, I don't care if you hate Trump, if you're a person who loves freedom, you have to be concerned about this, because is the process being followed? We see it with Hillary and washing, bleach, wiping her required to be preserved information. We see the Hunter Biden. What people who have actually seen his laptop say it's full of all kinds of felonious information or felonious evidence. And yet here we are. We're like, have we become so supine as a people that we will suspend our rights just to go get this guy? It's very bizarre.
So now, we have very, very little information to go on. Just
Right.
what's hit the news, and of course, I'm not exactly very trusting of news sources these days either. But you bring up a really good point, and that is, the issues surrounding obtaining search warrants. This is critical law enforcement stuff, and the FBI has to follow the same process that any police department does when it comes down to meeting the requirements for presenting enough evidence to a judge to get that search warrant. And of course, getting a search warrant for a residence, which is the castle doctrine, if you will, that has always been probably the most restrictive ability to get a search warrant in our history, because the founding fathers are so concerned about people going into the homes of American citizens. So this is important stuff. Now, at what point do you think the FBI, or the Department of Justice, I should say, will make public the affidavit for that search warrant? What point do you think we'll be able to see that and then be able to judge for ourselves?
Let's. You're hitting a key point here, and this is something that my wife, a 29-year veteran of law enforcement, and she was talking about when this first happened. Well, where is the announcement? Where is just think about a municipal government where the mayor had a search warrant served against a guy running against, or a gal running against that mayor. The public and the media would demand an immediate state, either the law enforcement officers or the agency doing the investigation. We see nothing. We hear nothing.
Not only that,
And
Dave,
here it
but
is.
but I actually I had to do a double take when I read the one of the press reports that said the White House had no knowledge that the FBI was going to conduct this raid. I do they think we're idiots?
Mhm.
Well, don't answer that
No,
question.
you know what? They either think we're idiots. Again, Randy, I study all this stuff. My degree was political science. So during the time of the Soviet Union, I had, studied this, and I guess because of that, I've always been very hypersensitive to those things or changes in our own government, our own society that might lead to that. But there's a great book. I would commend it to people, A Mountain of Crumbs. I can't think who the author is right now, but this is a young gal growing up in the Soviet Union. And she eventually ends up in Texas, marries an American, and moves to Texas where she's free, and she writes her memoirs. It's an excellent book because she does explain a lot of things growing up in that Soviet culture. And she talks about people who are disappeared, but they're always seeing the thing people have to understand. Those people sent to gulags were charged with crimes. And this is when I see these capricious crimes being exacerbated. Just watch for them to criminalize, and we'll talk about this later, but the criminalization of your taxation. Wait till an audit is a criminal investigation with 87,000 new and agents, comrade, coming into the system. But the thing is that she is talking to a Westerner about something they call a game called Ranyo. And I'm not probably pronouncing it correct. I just read it. It's one of those words that you read. It's a Russian word. And to you and I, if you look it up, it means white lie in Russian. But during the time of the Soviet Union, it was she describes it as a game the people of the Soviet Union played. And the Westerner asks her, well, what are the rules? She goes, it's very simple. They lie to you. You know they're lying. They know you know they're lying, and they keep lying to you, and you keep pretending to believe them. and that's Ranyo in the Soviet Union. It was everybody knew they were lying, and the Soviets, the government knew they were lying to the people, but the people had to pretend they believed it. And this is the kind of thing we're in a society today where this constant stream of lie. The whole thing with propaganda, of course, if you study the nature of propaganda, throughout the Trump era, everything was a lie. Yeah, he's bombastic, he exaggerates, he does these things, but the nature of lies from the government is far more serious than that. And we have seen since this administration, where is the transparency? This continuous stream of lies. This has just become. We make the Soviet Union look honest, and this is the problem I have.
I've been watching this as you have, and I got to tell you, I'm rather incredulous that we could have taken this path so quickly, and that with the full cooperation of and I'm not a big political person. In fact, I don't think that politics belongs in policing. However, it has now become so intertwined with law enforcement and the political, tentacles that you can't have a conversation about policing without bringing politics into it. So we may as well just dive right in here. And I just have to say that people who I thought had common sense and were really concerned about the country in the democratic leadership of this nation suddenly seem to have all gone into lockstep, and that lockstep is a goose step with a totalitarian type of mindset, where we are now becoming a nation that is under siege by our own leadership, and this is something that should frighten every American. But I see a lot of complacency here.
And it's not just complacency, it's agreement. And, I got to tell you, when you study the nature of political movements, Hannah Arendt warned us in The Origins of Totalitarianism. Number one, don't expect the intellectual class to preserve your freedoms, because they all become what we would look at in terms of political science as Platonists. Plato's The Republic, the philosopher king should rule. Plato hated democracy. And we've seen in these movements ever since the Obama era, policing in the 21st century, these extremely interesting yet always couched intellectual terms. These movements, the Guardian movement. Well, what is that a neutral value? What the heck does that mean? But it wasn't just about a name. It was about making sure that you didn't use other terms. And when you study the nature of totalitarianism, it's always about controlling thought. It's about changing the meaning of words. And now look at this. We have dictionary companies that will change the meaning of a word based on whatever the White House press secretary said today. We're in a recession. Oh, no, that's not actually the definition of a recession anymore. And these are the kind of things, it's just become bizarre. Now, on top of this, and again, this is the problem when you talk about those of us who are from a law enforcement culture. Our very first oath is to our Constitution, because we know that when this country was being developed, we had to have a check and balance against the government itself, against the actual, and our Constitution that of course Obama called a document of negative rights. Well, because it restrains government. The Constitution isn't for the government; it's for the people. It's a most individualistic oriented document ever written. And those first 10 amendments, that our forefathers were terrified of just listing 10, because they were afraid that the government would eventually say, well, those are the only freedoms you have. That's why the 9th and 10th are so vague and broad. But again, nobody reads history. And when you do read history now, if you're not careful, you're reading a bizarre twist of slanted government, like the 1619 Project, which is absolute a fable, an oppressor fable. And the problem I have, and we could, Randy, God, you're opening such a Pandora's box of ideas and issues. Law enforcement has got to first of all worry about the the rights of the people, the rights of the victims. What we've seen is this social conflict theory evolve from uh, the 1960s and 70s in sociology and criminology over to law schools, especially University of Michigan really professed this, where now the criminal is the victim of an oppressive society.
Right.
And that society creates the victim criminal. And the victim is ignored. The crime victim is not even an element of it, not even thought of.
Look,
And this is the kind of things that we've got to analyze. If you're going to stay free, folks, you're going to have to go back to constitutional freedoms. You're going to have to put chiefs in place that believe in those constitutions. Thank God for the sheriffs is all I can say.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's I mean, this topic is so, it's almost overpowering, because when you try and put your thoughts around it, I mean, there's just so much to it. But what I do want to get back to something you said, which I think is really critical, and that is the lack of consideration for victims now. I mean, you literally don't even hear any empathy, any sympathy, any respect for the victims of violent crime across America. They don't even, it's like not even an afterthought. In fact, not only is it in New York City or in the state of New York, where it's probably the most glaring example of a failed system anywhere in America, the low bail, no bail insanity. But what's a little known part of that was the laws put into place by the New York State Legislature and governor that forces the prosecutors to give identifying information, including home addresses and phone numbers, to the very people that victimized these victims in the first place, that murdered their family, that sexually assaulted them, that robbed them at gunpoint. Now they have to give identifying information to them. What happened? I mean, you and I were from an age where we saw an evolution where victims were suddenly put in the forefront, saying, you know what, we really need to take care of these victims. They began, prosecutors' offices and police departments began victim witness programs to guide them through the system of justice. And there was a respect level. The parole boards would have to ask for the input of the victims before they could parole someone. Well, now you're seeing just the opposite happening, where the victims are being victimized all over again by the very same system that should be based on protecting them. Have you watched this evolution, and has it stunned you as well?
Again, this is why it's so hard to talk about it, Randy, because as you watch this occurring over especially the last 8 years, accelerating, the problem I've seen is there's so many angles we could talk about that it's hard for me to coalesce into a singular idea. The victim has been so completely swept under the rug. A friend of mine's son was shot in a nice student residential building near the University of Arizona multiple times by a suspect. They finally arrested the suspect, and the police went to all the trouble. They found that there were actually two suspects involved, the shooter and his buddy. And the thing that was so amazing to me is that the detective, put together a heck of a case. They wanted a huge bond, attempted homicide, and yet the county attorney here in Pima County, Arizona, which is an enlightened, new age, whatever you want to call it, socially aware prosecutor, asked for $5,000 bond
for attempted murder.
the kid The kid he was shot several months ago. He's still recovering. The suspect, was located, arrested finally. And the thing is that you ask yourself, look, don't they see that this even victimizes the family even more, the victim even more, that there's so much contempt for the victim. And again, understand that you can't, this whole theory, this whole legal theory is absurdist. It's just based on fantasy. But, and I keep thinking back to an article I read several years ago, Talib Nassim, the guy that wrote the Black Swan, and he said that, that it was intellectual yet idiots, the intellectual cadre in this country that's unable to have second order thinking. And you see this time and again, like the clown that ordered the searching of President Trump's house in Mar-a-Lago. They may be thinking, well, we're just going to get enough evidence to keep him from being president. But there's got to be a second order thinking. What is the ripple effect? And that's what second order thinking is, in essence, the ripple effect of any decision, of any action. And throughout this administration, we've seen the inability to even think about when anybody brings up an idea that, well, this could lead to X or Y. Well, no, we have an expert. And again, we're going to have to change that. Road to hell is paved, not with anything but experts now would be the best saying for it. And law enforcement suffers from the same thing, this pseudo intellectual malarkey, where we throw a panel of 12 people together who all agree, and 60 days later come out with, oh, let's change all of law enforcement about our ideas. That's what policing in the 21st century was. I don't care what you say. Nobody's actually read this stuff. When you sit down and read it, you go, wait, but that's just some grievance. And this is the thing we see in our country. Whoever has a grievance is the ruler. If you offend somebody, if I offend somebody in what I say, I am subject to their ire. And the media, future employers, anybody will shut me down. And that's the thing. That's what being canceled in. Oh, you've offended me. So your freedom of speech, gone. Freedom of association, gone. And the thing is, we see this on the other side. You can go and you can burn stores. You can protest in front of a federal felony against a Supreme Court justice. And our Justice Department is supine, which tells you our entire justice system is supine, laying there, and your liberties are being literally eroded. And America, you got to get mad, because this has just become insane. Unless you want to be a banana republic. Everybody says that. This is kind of an insult to banana republics. This is ridiculous now.
So we're at the very first stage of this this Trump search warrant, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of discussion about this. There's going to be, never before in history has this ever taken place, and I can't help but wonder, has the FBI, which once was considered to be the untouchables, if you will, have they become now the untrustables? And you and I both worked with FBI folks before on a street level, and I have nothing but respect for the abilities and the dedication for many of those field agents. But I can't help but think, after observing what took place over the Trump administration and over this, since Biden has been in office, that the FBI is no longer a law enforcement organization, that it has become a political tool of a political party. And that frightens the hell out of me, because the abuse of power at that level can literally enslave our entire nation.
You and I haven't had a bourbon and a cigar yet to really sit down and talk about this. Because
I have a feeling that's coming.
It's coming, and that's where I coalesce a lot of my thoughts. But you're talking about things that I am terrified of. Like I said, if you sit there and you read Hannah Arendt, the origins of totalitarianism, there are certain factors. You have to have the crisis. you have to have a boogeyman of some kind, and we all know Hannah Arendt survived, the rise of the Nazis. And that obviously, she's brilliant. She was brilliant, amazing. But the thing that you always see is the odd, and I commend that book. It's a long, hard read, but what you see is always the intellectual class leads the road to totalitarianism. And again, the FBI is highly educated department, and this is the thing you have to understand, that the SS, 28% of the SS, this the most hideous military slash law enforcement unit in the history of the world, they were PhDs. 50+% had masters or higher. And this is the thing. The intellectual class has to constantly be refreshed in what freedom is. And this is the problem I have too in our whole society. Why is education so antagonistic to freedoms, so embracing of totalitarian ideas? When somebody calls a cop a Nazi, I always listen back to the fact that that was Stalin's trick, because he realized very quickly that fascism had a bad vibe to it, even though they were socialist as well. They're not. When everybody says, "Well, that's on the right and this is on the left," that's a European right and left. You got to quit forgetting them. They were fascist or socialist. In fact, that was one thing. Lenin was very upset that they lost Mussolini, and Mussolini developed his fascism. It's all that fascism is communism with a nationalist bent and an idea that you can get the media and you can get big business to work with government without having to take over both. Well, and boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Where's that going on?
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah, it does. Doesn't it scare the hell out of you? And that's the problem I have is, look, you know what? It's one thing. The First Amendment is one of the key elements because it is the First Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of association, the right to assemble and protest. We let COVID suspend all of our civil rights, and we sat there again. We were the ones who were supine. So maybe, I don't know, being free requires a little graphite on your spine. All you guys and gals listening to this, let's do a self-evaluation. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to protest? And that's the thing, let's speak up, learn to speak again, and cancel culture. That's the thing. That's the most ridiculous thing that is literally, if people accept cancel culture, they're nothing but a member of a mob.
Yeah.
And they're not a free society of individuals anymore.
Well, I got to tell you, man, this is a dark subject, and as you know, this is a law enforcement show, but law enforcement, when it comes down to it, and this was something that I always wondered about, being a student of history myself, when Nazi Germany began its rise, there was a civil police department. They were cops, just like there were cops in New York and in the United States. But when they started to create laws that would oppress others, who did it fall upon to enforce those laws? And that's what I'm afraid of, that the law enforcement community in America is going to be forced into a role of an oppressor. A real oppressor, not the titles that are being thrown around in the Portland protests with the mob there, but true oppressors, because they will be forced to enforce laws. Let's talk about. We're gonna jump right into the IRS deal now. So now, it's almost unfathomable that they could actually get through an entire budgetary monstrosity where 85,000 more IRS agents are going to be put into place, and nobody is screaming that this is an outrage. I'm almost speechless, Dave. I'm almost speechless that the that they could get away with it, and it looks like they may.
Oh, they have. I mean, let's face it. As we are shooting right now, the House still hasn't voted on it, but Biden's is a rubber stamp to that. This is the thing. Let's go back in history, which nobody does again, when we'd have because it's such a evil topic. But let's go back in history. The Constitution of the United States had to be changed. I want everybody to listen to this carefully. The Constitution of the United States had to be changed to allow income tax. I said that right. Income tax was against the Constitution of the United States. There would be no IRS. Because you know why? Because envy destroys freedom. Envy is not jealousy. Envy is you have something I don't have. I don't want to work to get what you have. I might be jealous of you with that, and then make me work harder to get what you have, Randy. But envy is, look, you've got it. It makes me unhappy you have it, and I just want it taken away from you. That's envy. Envy can literally be decided. It's almost like schadenfreude, joy at others' sorrow. And only this is different. It's also sorrow at others' joy. This is why it's a sin, and jealousy is not a sin. Envy is a sin, and our ancestors knew that's one of the things that destroyed the Greek and Roman cultures. They were very, very concerned about envy. That's why democracies don't last very long. That's why they talked about being able to vote away people's money. That's why they built into the Constitution, number one, we were not a democracy, we were a republic. Number two, we had all the powers of government spread out. So no one group had power. So it was constantly power against power. This is why when the states lost their power, which was the Senate, the Senate did not represent the people. The Senate was to represent the interests of the states. The people are represented in the House of Representatives. The government is represented by the president, and the referees were supposed to be the Supreme Court judges. And if you read the anti-federalist papers, all these people said, understand, we need to make sure, because that's every court, this court will eventually try to become the imperial judiciary. And the thing is that even Franklin warned about when you put a president in, and we're going to pick a good one the first time, he said, paraphrasing him, but we can't control who you put in afterwards, and eventually you're going to have a king. And this is the kind of thing we have to understand. Our government was designed, number one, never to be able to take away your personal earnings, or especially to deny your descendants your efforts and your savings and your capital. And yet now we're talking about, well, if you die and you have so much money, we're going to take half of it. Eventually they want to take all of it. That's egalitarian. That's so Soviet gang. It's ridiculous. But again, it's why do you care if somebody's a millionaire? Well, if you're envious of them, you're not going to get that money. You know the government's not going to give you that money, but you don't want them to have. You're sorrowful at their joy. And this is the thing. We have a whole society based on envy now. Let's go to the IRS. Again, like I said, they shouldn't even exist. Now we've changed our Constitution. We've taken away the states' rights. Nobody's there. The people are represented by the House of Representatives, but the Senate is the same thing. And what you can say is essentially urban America runs this country now. The LAs, the New Yorks, the Phoenixes, they run our states. Now you have a system where envy has become dominant, and bringing in 87,000 new agents, the 700,000 new rounds they bought. Why are you buying rounds for accountants? Aren't they supposed to just be doing audits?
Yeah.
But once you criminalize the IRS, think about it. Think of the power you're going to have. Oh, what do you vote Republican? Come in for an audit and bring all your paperwork. Oh, and by the way, bring this and show that, we don't agree with that deduction. That might be criminal now. And, people are like, oh, you're paranoid. Well, I am now.
Yeah.
I wasn't before.
Right.
But what the heck?
Well, it's not like we haven't seen an IRS who was weaponized against the people previously in the Obama administration, and of course,
look what happened to the Tea Party.
Yeah. We're not good at learning from our past mistakes. Apparently, Dave, we're just destined to continue to repeat these mistakes over and over. But before we get into the next topic, I want to talk about a company that is supporting law enforcement in a major way, and also has a product that can keep law enforcement officers and their families safer. It's called officerprivacy.com. And it's a company that helps protect against being doxxed. Now, when I first was approached about what doxing is, I didn't really understand it. I'm not a real technical guy. But I've learned since that there are people that really know how to use the internet, that many of these people have a deep hatred towards law enforcement and know how to utilize technology in order to literally target law enforcement officers and their families by finding information about where these officers live, their history on the internet. And what officerprivacy.com does is it removes the ability for these nefarious people to try and get identifying information from a law enforcement officer or his family. So it's owned by a former law enforcement officer, great guy, and it's not expensive. And I sincerely urge, if you are or have been law enforcement, you take a look at officerprivacy.com. And I think you're going to find something that is going to sincerely interest you. That's officerprivacy.com. Now, I think let's go away from the IRS and these massive topics that we brought up, because even as that oppressiveness kind of is starting to envelope some of our discussion, on the local levels, we're still got more and more problems. This headline just came out. NYPD cops leave in record-breaking exodus before full pensions set in. Quote, this exodus is a result of cops in the prime of their careers deciding they have had enough, unquote. That's from Patrick Lynch, Police Benevolent Association. And the number of cops who have filed to leave before reaching full pension eligibility, offered at 20 years in New York City, 20 years, has reached nearly 2,000 officers so far this year, compared to 641 last year. So a total of 2,465 NYPD officers have filed to leave the department this year. We're only in August. Dave, that's 10% of the entire department who have said we're not doing it anymore. This is, and then the mayor comes out, a couple weeks ago, and says, well, when he was confronted about this, says, that's not something that really worries me. Well, then he's an idiot, because he ought to be worried about that. And we see this, and it's not just NYPD. We're seeing this all over the country. But Dave, what is I don't think people grasp just how serious this is, because the long-term implications are astounding. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts is that just tells you how bad our society is today, when young men and women give up their careers because of the cynical nature of our politicians who've created an environment. I got to say, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is these kids that are staying in the fight are really remarkable in spite of everything. And now you got them bailing, people with less than 20 on. It's amazing to me, when you and I started, there was prestige. There was an intrinsic reward, as we used to say. We're not doing it for the money. We're doing it for what we believe. We're doing it for the adventure. Let's be honest. It's a great adventure. But at the same time, we knew we had qualified immunity, which is not what the media presents, an unqualified right to do bad. It was simply the fact that we knew if we act in good faith based on our policy and training, we would be protected. Now politicians are saying, no, not at all. In fact, we're going to go back and retroactively look in the past, use hindsight bias, and prosecute you. And all you got to do is see what happened in Louisville. The lies and the media. You've got the propagandists in the media. They're not media anymore. There's no media anymore. It's all propaganda. And if you study the nature of propaganda, which we don't have time on this show, Randy, but I'll tell you what, someday we need to just take an hour and break down what the nature of propaganda is. And this thing is that we are in a society where there's constant oppression. Well, it's a rational choice for an officer to say, okay, I'm not waiting 20. I'm going to take my career and move on to something else. It's just amazing to me, and that's the thing. It breaks my heart because we're losing all these people, and they're like, what? Why would I serve a community that doesn't respect me? Why would I risk my life when the fact is, if I survive a confrontation, you're going to come back and go after me again. It, this is I get so frustrated. This is my problem. Over the decades that I've interviewed officers who have won armed confrontations, survived being shot, survived all these critical incidents, the one thing that I always felt was, look, that they would time and again say being shot at wasn't the hardest part. Being shot wasn't the hardest part. The administrative stress afterward was the hardest part. And I was always, thank God I never had to shoot anybody, because that was the nightmare. And the thing is, now you not only have the administrative stress, you have the criminal stress. The system is literally stacked against you. Like I said, part of this, understand what this, when you look at this particular form of criminal justice theory, the cops are the bad guys. The victim, the hero, is the criminal. That's what this social conflict theory does. It flips all the things we know upside down. And the problem is arguing against it because it's pseudo intellectual claptrap. But the point is again, it's got its own esoterica, its own language, and it's hard for normal people to argue it because they get hit with language they don't even understand. They get hit with terms they don't understand, which are made up whole cloth idiocies.
Yeah.
And again, it's frustrating because you got law schools putting out lawyer after lawyer, and those lawyers become judges that believe this malarkey. And of course, the end result and the reality is this crime wave across our country and cops leaving, like in New York. And that's not just New York, it's all across the country. That's just New York isn't a microcosm, it's a macrocosm of what's happened nationally. And country, I'm telling you what, you're going to get what you deserve. You keep this up, this chaos, I study all this for cops. I write articles on this stuff, and I've been studying civil crisis. I've been studying civil violence, and it scares me to death because we're the ones caught in the middle of all that kind of civil crisis. Our youngsters, our men and women on the street, they're the ones that are going to be put in that turmoil. And the one thing that America has always avoided most political conflicts, because we knew we get a revolution every 2 years politically. And that's the thing when I read a book like Why Men Rebel by Ted Gurr, he talks about the fact that America mostly has escaped political violence, and the one time we couldn't, we killed hundreds of thousands in a civil war.
Yeah.
And it terrifies me. I'm not saying we're going to have a civil war, but I'm saying is we allowed that civil conflict to occur after George Floyd without any government intervention. And if you study the history of rioting, without action, without ramification, the next riots are going to be much, much worse. And it's just, to me, I just worry and worry and worry about this stuff. But again, when you try to write about it, you try to talk about it, and you're a conspiracy theorist or worse, you get some label slapped on you, and then it's you're canceled. So it's just, again, I read this stuff and I don't even know how to express it. It's just, you're right. This is just a small symptom of a greater crisis.
I want to talk about the real world implications of this crisis in law enforcement, and the real world implications are police officers being severely injured or killed in the line of duty at an unprecedented rate. And I created the Wounded Blue because of the way that many of these police officers have been treated once they become injured and disabled. Dave, you've spoken to literally hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers who have survived critical incidents such as shootings, and you said very eloquently that they're not even scared of the bad guys. They're scared of their own administrations, and that often translates into the way they are treated once they become injured and disabled. And that's why the Wounded Blue exists. So for my law enforcement audience out there, we realize your struggles, whether those injuries that you have been subjected to were physical or psychological and emotional. The team at the Wounded Blue is made up of all cops who have been shot, stabbed, beaten, run over, have been through this horrendous experience, and it's a lonely feeling. That's why you'll see on my shirt, "Never forgotten, never alone," because that is what we all feel when we have been severely injured in the line of duty. So if you are a police officer or have been, and you're struggling, contact us here at the Wounded Blue. Go to thewoundedblue.org. Now, also, if you are a law enforcement officer or have been or are suffering, we have an incredible training conference coming up in October. It's called the Second Annual National Law Enforcement Survival Summit. This, if you got one training to go to in a year, come to this training. Every aspect about surviving a law enforcement career, physically, tactically. In fact, Dave and Betsy are going to be instructors at this. Emotionally, psychologically, relationships, the way your children react once you're injured in the line of duty. This is going to be an amazing conference. We had our first one in Las Vegas last year. It was magical. So please go to thewoundedblue.org. It's October 11th through the 14th in Indiana. So it's right in the center of the country. Make sure that you go to your agency and say, "I need to go to this." And if you can't afford it, contact me, Randy, at thewoundedblue.org, and maybe we can get a scholarship for you, okay? So go to thewoundedblue.org, go under events, and check out the National Law Enforcement Survival Summit. So Dave, in the few minutes that we have left, you and I have been involved in training literally for decades. So this headline kind of caught my eye. Veteran LAPD sergeant to serve as civilian dean of training for Portland. And this is the rest of the headline. This is from Oregon Live. Thomas L. Datro said he wants to incorporate Portland residents into police training and strives to teach officers to be problem solvers. He is a sergeant with the LAPD and has been selected by Portland Police to serve as the Bureau's new civilian director of training. Now, he's got to pass a background check. He's going to get paid $205,000, not bad. He's been a cop for almost 20 years. He's got a master's degree in public administration from Cal State, a doctorate in education from Southern California. Now, he was chosen he hosts a podcast called Policing in America, billed as a discussion of race and policing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with the goal of pursuing uncomfortable conversations to spark positive change. It's what I found interesting was that that some of the members of the Portland City Council didn't want to hire him because he actually has some police experience. They wanted someone that had no police experience whatsoever to be the head of training for the Portland Police Bureau. Dave, it's like going from the sublime to the ridiculous, at least he's a 20-year cop that's been involved in training. But I'm smelling progressive when I read some of his quotes here. I can't help but think that this isn't going to be about surviving a law enforcement career.
When I very first heard that, Betsy read the headline to me, and then we read about it. The thing is that, of course, if it's Portland, it's woke. It's absolutely woke. And the problem is we all know woke is, again, it's that esoterica. It's going to be psychobabble malarkey. The problem we have as a society is we just can't really deal with the reality. We just much rather deal with utopian dreams. Now, the fact that they're calling it a dean and all these other things, it's not going to change. Police work's still going to be a man or a woman going on a call, dealing with people in crisis, dealing with people who are victims, dealing with criminals. That's a pragmatic Aristotelian reality of it. And sometimes you just got to take charge. Sometimes you have to fight people. Sometimes you have to kill people. And then you don't know. You just never know. That's the whole thing. This is a very ambiguous world with all kinds of risks. Law enforcement officers have to be trained across a broad spectrum. The civilians who have no idea are making judgments about what our training should be. And I always find it amazing when you put a FATS type system, a firearm simulator up, and bring in the media, they kill everybody in the scenario.
That's
They're
right.
the worst of all judgmental people. And when I've been interviewed, of course, I've been under attack for several years now because I teach officer safety, which is a sin, a deep, terrible sin, and I get these calls and I'll be talking to the reporters and they've never read any of my articles. They know nothing about me. They've had some hearsay. Something has been pointed out by some academic in John Jay College or somewhere that Dave Smith teaches this or teaches that. And I go, what does that mean to you? Well, it means you teach to hurt people. Wait. So you're saying I should not teach police officers to defend themselves effectively, to have the right mindset to survive? And you're just talking about how important the wounded blue, which is more important than ever now, because part of post-traumatic stress is the way society reacts to your level of violence that you've been involved, how it reacts to you. And again, this is the thing, is that our society has to understand what kind of society you want. You want cops that are trained effectively. 2 weeks before George Floyd died of his drug overdose and we prosecuted those officers, they were learning about pronouns. That's a critical thing, right? They're having pronoun training in Minneapolis PD. And then they surrendered the city to the protesters. I got to tell you what, if you'd written that 20 years ago, imagine having written that as a screenplay, people would just laugh at you.
Yeah,
Mock it.
it would have been like the Escape from New York.
Exactly. Here's the thing. Think about it. In September, let's say 14th, 2001, America was madly in love with its crime fighters, and madly in love with the military, madly in love with those who kept us safe. 9/11 had refreshed everybody in how important it was to have people defending you and protecting you. And now we have a society where they want to defund the police. They want to do what do they want? What can stagnate? What do you believe about human nature? Well, again, it's Platonism. It's utopian dreams that somehow our species will change for the better if we just don't do any social constraints on them. This is all, again, we saw under COVID the bizarre nature of it. We saw the bizarre suspension of reality. We saw literally the destruction of everything we know about science. It's so funny.
You know what, Dave, I'm going to have to cut us off there because I'm running out of time, literally. And
but you got me fired up.
I know. Well, we will continue this discussion, and I want to thank you for coming on to the show, Dave. Your visions here are just amazing. I'm so happy we were able to share it with the people who watch and listen to the show. So once again, Dave Smith, thanks for joining me here on The Voice for American Law Enforcement.
Thank you, Randy.
So at the end of this show, I do what's called End of Watch, where we memorialize those officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice during this week. The first one is Deputy Sheriff Andrew Peary, El Paso County Sheriff's Office, Colorado. Deputy Sheriff Andrew Peary was shot and killed while responding to a shots fired call, 5:30 p.m. Fountain Police Department officer Deputy Peary and another deputy responded to a shooting call. When they arrived in the area, they were immediately met with gunfire. Deputy Peary was transported and he succumbed to his wounds. A woman was found dead in the home's front yard, presumed to have been shot by the subject. The subject committed suicide. Andrew Peary, Deputy Sheriff, El Paso County Sheriff's. End of watch, Sunday, August 7th, 2022. Special Police Officer Marika Mannion, District of Columbia Police Department, Library Office of Public Safety. Special Police Officer Marika Mannion was accidentally shot and killed during baton training inside a training room. Several officers were undergoing baton training when the contracted trainer, a retired police lieutenant from another agency, inadvertently shot her toward the end of the training session. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter. Special Police Officer Marika Mannion, District of Columbia Public Library Office of Public Safety, End of watch, Thursday, August 4th, 2022. Sergeant Jean Harold Estrie, Fairburn Police Department, Georgia. Sergeant Jean Harold Estrie was killed in a four-car crash in Douglasville. He was driving an unmarked police Dodge Charger when it collided with a truck traveling in the southbound lane. The car crossed into Sergeant Astrie's lane and struck him head-on. Sergeant Astrie was a United States Air Force Reserve veteran who served with the Fairburn Police Department for over 5 years. Sergeant Jean Harold Estrie, Fairburn Police Department, Georgia. End of watch Thursday, July 28th, 2022. Each of these officers gave their lives in the line of duty for the people that they serve. I want to thank you for joining me here on the Voice for American Law Enforcement. If you're listening to this on iHeartRadio, watching it on AmericaOutloud.com or any of the streaming platforms, please feel free to contact me, Randy, at thewoundedblue.org if you have questions or comments. Follow us on Facebook at the Voice for American Law Enforcement. And remember, support your law enforcement. Go to thewoundedblue.org. Give what you can. Thanks so much. This is Randy Sutton.